Within the last hour, we've got this announcement from Liz Truss. I think it's signal. I think it's really important, this idea of saying, I'm going to look at reforming the tax system such that we treat not the taxation unit as an individual anymore, but as a household. And depending on how much money we're talking about, that could have a dramatic effect on things like family formation. Do you think it's a big deal or not?
I think it could be. I mean, this is something that will obviously, you'll see, I suppose the proof in the pudding would come over the years. It will be something that, would be interesting to work out. I think the issue around taxation is going to be crucial when it comes to this leadership race, simply because the cost of living is putting so much pressure on so many ordinary families. And without issuing mass pay rises left, right and centre, government needs to find a way of keep putting more money into people's pockets. And I suppose tax cuts would be the easiest way of doing that. However, there are fears then over how it is that you manage to keep the oversized state on its feet, and how you don't end up adding to inflation by cutting taxes. And this is going to be something that is slightly difficult for the Tory party this is going to be a difficult circle for the party to square. Both candidates right now are running very keenly. They're mentioning their Thatcherite credentials. And this is a slight issue because that's something that plays very well, obviously, with party members, certainly party members in the South. But that's not actually, I think, the party's main sort of constituency anymore. Certainly, if you look at Boris Johnson's electoral victories, and even if you go back to David Cameron, you look to sort of the Midlands and the North, where the fabled Red Wall. It's not actually Thatcherism that those people were voting for. They were voting for something else. They wanted something that was a bit more big state. And I think the idea of sort of wrapping yourself in the idea of an ideology that was well suited for the country almost half a century ago is not necessarily something that's going to go down well in communities that are not necessarily particularly keen on Margaret Thatcher. And I think tax cuts slightly play into that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I was talking to Niall Gardner, who works for the biggest American think tank, and he works them in the capacity of effectively curating the memory of Margaret Thatcher, who's a very popular figure on that side of the Atlantic. And, of course, she was around and influential at the same time as Ronald Reagan. And in America, Ronald Reagan, who was, dry but monetarist, tax cutter, he's held fondly by everybody pretty much now. There's not that thing that you have in the UK where Margaret Thatcher is still pretty Marmite, but divisive, and in parts of the country, amongst a certain cohort, remains almost uniquely reviled. It is a different proposition.
It is. I think another part of the issue around Thatcher's legacy, of course, is that she was in government at the time that, North Sea hydrocarbons were coming into their own, and that certainly helped the British state. Whereas we don't really have something on the same scale that we're prepared to tap into. That's not to say that it doesn't exist, but that we're prepared to tap into to perhaps help us with an economic boom. Now, were the next Prime Minister to decide, right, we're going to go big on shale gas, or we're going to look at, re-exploring parts of the North Sea because there are other deposits there, and maybe temper that with a massive building program of nuclear energy, that could be something that would be very useful. But neither candidate actually is particularly keen on that direction. Something that has been pointed out is that for all of Liz Truss likes to talk about being sort of pro-free market, XYZ, she has not yet made a strong stance either way on her position on net zero. That might be because she doesn't want to potentially taint herself by saying that she's against it. But nonetheless, the next Prime Minister, if they're to get themselves out of a hole, and if they are to retain some semblance of Boris Johnson's majority, it's going to take something a bit transformative. It's going to take a big idea sort of Prime Minister, the sort of Prime Minister that we all thought Boris Johnson might be, to sort of, I suppose, reimagine British society and the British economy. That ultimately is what a lot of people were voting for when it came to Brexit, and that's not really been delivered. And they don't have a long time to do that. They don't have a lot of time to do that. And I fear that with these two personalities, you've got Rishi Sunak, who is a sort of quite a big personality relatively, but a safety-first kind of Tory, juxtaposed with Liz Truss, who is very big on cutting taxes, but appears to have very little personality, very little cut-through. The fear is that neither of them will be able to do enough in the eyes of the electorate in 2 years, less than 2 years, to be able to get over the finish line at the next general election and keep the Tories in power.